Chapter 1231, Visiting Everywhere. Emlyn subconsciously looked at the high stool on the other side of the room and saw the exquisite doll. His eyes immediately revealed a look of amazement, admiration, ardor, and other mixed emotions. He opened his mouth and almost blurted out the question of where he could buy such a doll and who was the master behind this piece of work. However, he was already an adult and had experienced plenty of things. He knew that bringing up such a question was very impolite, so he planned to find an opportunity to ask after the discussion on serious matters were finished. Sharon frowned indiscernibly as her body floated up. She bowed at Reinette Tinneker and Sherlock Moriarty. Klein said simply,
"There's no need for small talk. Our initial plan is this."
He shared how he would let his historical projection take the initiative to step into a trap to attract the attention of the Rose School of Thought and described it in detail. Sharon, with her black bonnet, listened quietly and said with a slightly ethereal voice,
"They might not fall for it. After realizing that you are the attacker, that Shaman King will likely choose to retreat under the protection of sealed artifacts or angels."
This way, it could only implicate a portion of the Rose School of Thought's strength. Without waiting for Klein and Emlyn to respond, Reinette Tinneker's four heads opened their mouths and said at a faster pace,
"Their main target should likely be me."
Emlyn was a little lost hearing this, but he could roughly tell that the spirit world creature that Gehrman Sparrow had summoned had quite a status. Furthermore, it had a deep relationship with the Rose School of Thought's Temperance faction.
"That's right. Even if the Mother Tree thinks highly of me, the setup would most likely attract Miss Messenger."
After a moment of silence, Klein gave an addendum.
"Madam, you and I will attack the other Shaman King in the form of historical void projections."
Gehrman Sparrow is very respectful towards this spirit world creature.
Just as this thought flashed through Emlyn's mind, he saw the 8 eyes on the 4 heads sweep at him. He shivered and instinctively joined in the discussion.
Can this fool those from the Rose School of Thought?
Since Klein had suggested that, he must have thought of a corresponding solution.
"I have an item that can be lent to Miss Tinneker."
Having said that, he looked at Reinette Tinneker and said,
"That item can mimic the Beyonder powers that surface in your mind. I hope you can use it to summon your past self, then move yourself into a concealed state and inject your consciousness into the projection. This way, the Rose School of Thought won't be able to discover anything abnormal in a short period of time. It's very likely that they will fall for it and gather all their strength to surround and kill you and me, allowing Miss Sharon and Emlyn to find a chance to launch a surprise attack, if they're more cautious than I thought."
Klein paused for a moment before revealing a smile.
"In that short period of time, if you join forces with me in your peak condition, there is a chance of killing the Shaman King, despite him being under the protection of a sealed artifact. Now the main point is, do you know enough about the Beyonder powers to summon historical void projections, as well as entering into a concealed state? I can demonstrate the former to you, but I will think of a way for the latter."
Reinette Tinneker's 4 heads shook up and down at the same time.
"I can. No problem."
That's the general gist of it. You can confirm the details in the next few days.
Klein silently estimated the time, as if he made his delivery succinct. Sharon nodded indiscernibly and said,
"The most important thing is intel. Teacher can provide a portion of it. The rest can be obtained through magic mirror divination."
Merrick echoed.
"I remember the symbol you drew back then."
She also remembered that the question posed by the hidden existence didn't violate much of her privacy and didn't bring about too much shame. Emlyn thought for a moment and carefully asked,
How do we communicate on both sides? If we can't grasp the timing accurately, the plan will definitely fail.
The Blood Clan's Oath of Rose was unable to transmit what they saw and heard at such a great distance. Sharon glanced at Reinette Tinneker and said,
Teacher's main body can stay on our side. 10 seconds after she enters a concealed state, we will take action. Once she exits the concealed state, we will immediately leave regardless of whether we succeed.
She? Emlyn jumped in fright as he instinctively turned his head to look at Gehrman Sparrow. He remembered very clearly that she was summoned by Mr. World.
How terrifying.
Emlyn didn't know if he was referring to the spirit world creature or Gehrman Sparrow.
After the intelligence gathering is done, you can communicate again.
Seeing that it was almost time, Klein took off his hat and bade farewell. Emlyn's lips quivered, but he didn't ask anything in the end. He followed Gehrman Sparrow out of the house where Sharon and Merrick were.
Miss Messenger actually didn't ask for any gold coins. This is because I'm helping her. If she really wants payment, all the gold coins I have are historical projections. I can only rely on Emlyn. I have to say, the bangle of spirituality that Emlyn provided to Miss Magician has pretty good effects. On the one hand, it can strengthen Miss Magician's spirituality, and on the other hand, it can speed up her spirituality recovery, allowing her to last this long.
Just as the thoughts ran through Klein's mind, he heard Emlyn asked in puzzlement,
That ma'am, Miss Sharon is a Sequence 4 demigod of the mutant pathway?
Klein kindly informed him.
That's right. The potion's name is Puppet.
Emlyn was instantly enlightened as he fell silent for 2 seconds before saying with a complicated expression,
If only she didn't speak or move, then she would be perfect.
If it wasn't for the fact that a clown could be described as a master in terms of expression management, Klein nearly spewed a mouthful of water at Emlyn. He thought that the other party would praise Miss Sharon's beauty and doll-like characteristics, showing his infatuation and fervor, but in the end,
I can't understand what's on this fellow's mind.
after controlling his urge to spew out whatever was in his mouth, Klein sighed inwardly. Mouse. Emlyn glanced at him and seemed to have guessed what he was thinking. He scoffed and said,
Which 2 things do you like the most?
With Gehrman Sparrow's character, he wouldn't have answered such a mundane question. However, he was still Sherlock Moriarty, a friend of the vampire in front of him. After some thought, he walked into the alley and casually said,
Money and delicacies.
Emlyn asked further as he walked beside Gehrman Sparrow without any fear of the crazy adventurer like Miss Magician.
Then I'll give you a stack of edible gold pounds. Would you like it?
Klein imagined it and felt that this would taint the value of the gold pounds, but also cause the delicacies to lose their attractiveness. Hence, he slowly shook his head. Asa. The corners of Emlyn's mouth curled up.
So, although I also like exquisite, beautiful dolls and pure girls, if they were to combine together, it would inevitably make me find it a little odd. Yes, I believe that every doll of mine has their own character and story. If they suddenly come to life and not be like what I imagined, I would be very disappointed and worried. Of course, if I had the chance to obtain the puppet potion and sprinkle some on all my puppets, I might try it.
As Emlyn spoke of his contradictory thoughts, he acted like a philosopher.
If Miss Justice were here, she should be able to analyze Emlyn's mental state from such a reaction.
Before he could respond, Klein's figure instantly faded and vanished. In the rental apartment where Forrest and Zio lived, in front of the fireplace, Forrest leaned back against the reclining chair with a pale face. She pulled up the wool blanket covering her body and, with the help of cogitation, entered a deep sleep. 2 hours later, she woke up feeling energized, but there was still some fatigue on her face. This Miss Magician took a slow, deep breath and extended her hand again, pulling Gehrman Sparrow out of the air in front of her. Half of her demigod-level records were the summoning of historical void projections. Klein glanced at her. This time, without even nodding his head, he directly teleported out of the house and entered an empty room in a hotel. 2 hours ago, he had been busy with Emlyn and Miss Sharon's matters. This time, he had returned to Backlund for himself. Without wasting any time, Klein immediately took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew it. When Miss Messenger stepped out of the void once again, Klein recounted how he wanted to hunt the dark demonic wolf and finally asked,
Do you have any suggestions?
Renette Tinneker's 4 blonde, red-eyed heads bobbed up and down at the same time.
Saphira Castle.
In essence, it's the same as Palez Zoroast's answer. Klein pressed curiously.
How?
Renette Tinneker's 4 heads answered in unison.
I don't know.
Klein silently exhaled and thanked her.
Sorry to trouble you. You can leave now.
The blonde, red-eyed heads held by Renette Tinneker immediately replied.
Bill. Records. 4/1351. September. 4. Gehrman. Sparrow. O's. Me. 1. Gold coin.
With that said, she turned transparent and returned to the spirit world. Klein was stunned for 2 seconds before he slowly took out his wallet from his inner pocket and picked up a paper crane. Shoch. He wrote on the paper crane he carried with him.
I have some questions to ask of you.
After doing all of this, Klein lay on the bed and fell asleep. In the hazy dream world, he once again saw Will Septon, who was lying in a black pram and wrapped in silver silk.
You're already over a year old. Do you still think you're a baby that's a few months old?
Pretending that he didn't see him sucking his fingers, Klein quickly described his conundrum. The plump Will Septon retracted his thumb and sized up Klein.
Isn't the answer obvious?
Klein was pleasantly surprised and puzzled. Will Septon smiled and said,
You must have been eating too few desserts recently, causing your memory to be bad. Do you still remember what happens to a beyonder below an angel of the fate pathway when they see you directly?
This! Klein's eyes lit up. Chapter 1232, Comparison Experiments. After becoming a demigod and gaining some level of control over Saphira Castle, Klein was able to prevent its aura from permeating out into the real world and augmenting him. This made him stop considering similar problems. After all, this would result in abnormalities, causing him to be recognized by the beyonders of the fate pathway at a glance. It was rather unsafe. And at this moment, once he received Will Septon's reminder, he felt that it opened up new possibilities.
When I was only a subsidiary to Saphira Castle and only had the right to use it, the aura and projection of Saphira Castle made a saint of the fate pathway not dare to look at me directly. I was equivalent to a mythical creature in the eyes to the corresponding low and mid-sequence beyonders. Now that I have initial control over Saphira Castle, there's a high chance I can make the effects better. This can affect angels who are complete mythical creatures themselves. Saphira Castle's level reaches that of sequence 0 at the very least. Yes, according to my deductions, it might even be higher than sequence 0. It has the trait that just knowing of it will result in corruption.
Klein's mind whirred with activity as though streaks of lightning were flashing across his mind. He quickly made up his mind. After returning to the forsaken land of the gods, he would find the monsters in the depths of the darkness and do some experiments with the marionettes in the fog of history, so as to deduce if his idea worked. He smiled and said to the 1-year-old child in the black pram,
I understand what you mean. I'll get someone to send you ice cream soon.
Will Septon, who was wrapped in silver silk, slowly turned his head and looked to the side.
No, there's no need. I've been eating too much ice cream during this period of time, and it's starting to affect my body's development.
Klein pricked up his brows and asked,
Genuine, top-grade ice cream produced right from the Intis capital. Try her.
Give it to me next week.
Will Septon hesitated before answering. With that said, the plump 1-year-old child turned around and buried his face into a tiny pillow in the pram. Due to the limited time Miss Magician had at maintaining the historical void projection, Klein didn't say anything else. Using his unique trait, he forcefully escaped the dream and woke up before getting out of bed. Right on the heels of that, he stretched out his right hand and repeatedly pulled at the air. 4 to 5 times later, his arm sank as he dragged out a woman wearing a simple linen robe with a tree bark belt. She was barefooted and had long black hair. She was a lady with average looks, the leader of the ascetics of the Church of Evernight, servant of concealment, Ariana. At the same moment, in Hillston Borough, in an apartment, Fours, who was sitting in a reclining chair, seemed to be pulled by invisible threads as she sat up abruptly. Her body straightened as the blood vessels on her forehead throbbed. She felt that her spirituality was like a flood that flowed towards the void in front of her, one that she couldn't stop no matter how hard she tried. She was on the brink of being sucked dry. In the next second, this sudden surge eased quite a bit, but it remained frightening. It wasn't something that she could handle now. In a hotel room, Klein spoke succinctly once he saw the historical void projection of Ma'am Ariana gaining sentience.
I plan on cooperating with others to deal with a particular shaman king of the Rose school of thought.
Ariana nodded gently, indicating that she understood, but she didn't give any suggestions. Seeing that the ascetic leader didn't give him any warnings, Klein felt a lot more at ease with the plan to hunt the Shaman King. He then said,
I've been planning on targeting the dark demonic wolf recently.
Ariana opened her mouth slightly and said,
Be careful.
Did she mean to say that I shouldn't belittle the dark demonic wolf, Kotar?
Just as he was about to ask a question, his consciousness suddenly blurred. He saw the woman opposite him and his reflection in her eyes fade away as they quickly disappeared. Thud! Force collapsed into the reclining chair as her facial muscles twitched slightly.
This is more tiring than writing all night long.
She gritted her teeth and tried cogitating to fall asleep. Extreme exhaustion might sometimes paradoxically cause insomnia to a person. In the forsaken land of the gods, near Noy's ancient city in the north, there was no one in the dark wilderness. With the lantern emitting a faint yellow light, Klein circled around to confirm his surroundings. Then, he found a rock and sat down, no longer shielding the aura of the gray fog from seeping into reality. On this foundation, Klein consciously strengthened the projection that Sapphira Castle placed on him. After he was done with his preparations, he quickly turned a monster hidden in the darkness around him into a marionette. The marionette walked out of the darkness. Under the illumination of the lantern, it approached Klein and cast its gaze on him. In the eyes of this monster marionette, other than the coated and hatted Klein having deeper, more profound eyes, his temperament had also become even more indescribable. There wasn't much of a difference from before. After repeatedly testing the different types of monster marionettes, Klein confirmed that ordinary people, or most Beyonders, were unable to discover that he had the aura of Sapphira Castle on him. Following that, he reached out with his right hand and pulled out his body from half a day ago. He controlled the rather dull historical projection to cast his gaze over. This time, Klein saw a layer of grayish-white fog covering his body. Its interior was shimmering with light, but it didn't reveal its actual appearance. He then removed the projection support and attempted to pull out Marionettist Rosago and other Beyonders of the Seer pathway to repeat the experiment.
Yes, after enhancing the projection, Beyonders of the Seer pathway can directly discover something abnormal. However, those below the level of an angel can at least confirm that I'm related to Sapphira Castle. There's no way to directly see the strange door of light, which is also the projection of Sapphira Castle.
This outcome wasn't too surprising for Klein. He took a deep breath, and after preparing himself to rescue himself, he raised his hand and pulled out Winner Inuni from back when he hadn't been his marionette for long. Inuni raised his head bit by bit, and his eyes gradually reflected Klein's figure. There was a faint gray fog that emanated outwards. Deep in the fog, transparent or translucent twisted maggots were clustered around countless spherical lights. The spherical lights formed a door of light that was dyed bluish-black. The door of light was much clearer than before, as it appeared even more textured. At the same time, its shape changed as it extended even higher up. This made it look like a tall and thin, brilliant figure. And the grayish-white fog around it was the figure's hooded robe. The spherical lights constantly flashed, making Klein feel like he was being watched by this deep, mysterious, towering, and terrifying figure with his numerous eyes. With a boom, Klein's head involuntarily tilted back as blood mixed with transparent maggots spurted out of his pores. The worms of spirit fell to the ground as they frantically rolled and struggled. Some of them rapidly dissipated, while some eventually calmed down before crawling back into his body and into his pores.
Man, it's much better than directly losing consciousness and suffering memory loss the last time.
Klein rubbed his temples and sighed silently. Anuni, who was standing in front of him, had already vanished because of the impact that Klein had received. Unable to maintain the historical void projection, Anuni vanished. This was also one of the reasons why Klein didn't suffer too much damage this time. Without Winter Anuni, he was unable to see the mutated strange door of light. This reduced the continuous assault on his senses. After 2 seconds, Klein entered the fog of history, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the gray fog. Looking at the faint dark glow rising from his body and melting away, Klein finally heaved a sigh of relief and gave a self-deprecating laugh.
I nearly corrupted and corroded myself. In the future, I'll use Rosago and the other Beyonders of the Seer pathway to do additional experiments. If there's no direct assault, I need to confirm if there will be a reverse corruption from Sapphire Castle's projection with the increase in observation time.
The southern continent, East Balaam, Faltech City, that was under attack. Under the illumination of the crimson moon, the Loan soldiers, hiding behind a simple shelter, took turns to rest to recover their energy. Their faces were black and covered with traces of gunpowder. Occasionally someone would wake up and take out some dried tobacco leaves and casually roll it. Then they would use the remaining matchstick to light it up and bring it to their mouths to suck deeply at it. In turn, their eyes exuded mostly numbness and blankness. When the soldiers guarding this line of defense smelled the tobacco, they instinctively sniffed and looked over. A soldier with a rifle asked his companion in a low voice,
"Do you still have any more tobacco leaves?"
His comrade shook his head.
"I've already finished smoking it. I don't know when the next batch will arrive. I'm going crazy without the tobacco."
The soldier who first spoke gestured outside the shelter with his chin.
"Do you see that? There are so many corpses, so many hands and feet. They all belong to living people."
Before the sun set, the resistance had launched a fierce attack by feverishly storming the various defensive lines at Faltech City. Their disregard for their own lives frightened the Loan soldiers and servant army who had been guarding the city. They almost had victory at hand, but ultimately failed to break through the critical line of defense. They left behind copious numbers of corpses before receding like the tide. His comrade fell silent for a moment before saying,
"Maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow we will be joining them."
Having said that, he looked up at the crimson moon and said in a dreamy voice,
"I wonder how Backland is. I haven't received a letter from home in a long while. I wonder if they have enough food, or if they can find a doctor when they are sick."
The soldier who had wanted to smoke was about to curse at the damn war and the damned enemy when his eyes suddenly widened. Trembling, he raised his right hand and pointed ahead.
They're alive."
One by one, the soldiers looked over and saw that under the crimson moon, the dismembered corpses that the resistance had left behind were beginning to crawl up one by one, swaying as they tried to approach the defense line. In the distance, a mysterious hooded person in black robe with embroidered crimson patterns stood behind the resistance and spread out his arms slightly. The spirituality of the entire battlefield was rapidly being nourished. Chapter 1233, 2 Spots. Ever since the war became prolonged, the Loan soldiers had seen countless unnatural phenomena. It happened so many that they were somewhat numb to it. However, the scene of the dismembered corpses crawling up remained a shocking scene. It left them horrified and confused. They felt as though they were unable to survive the impending disaster and would eventually become zombies. Of course, there was a reason why they were able to maintain their morale after seeing such unnatural phenomena. Just as they were feeling extreme fear, a series of chants sounded from behind them. Lacking clothes and food, they have no shelter in the cold. The Evernight did not forsake them, but bestowed them with love. The holy and sympathetic prayer reverberated across the entire defense line, causing the fear in every soldier to quickly dissipate, their bodies and minds turning tranquil. Then a number of the soldiers followed orders and moved out cannons covered in silver patterns. They adjusted the muzzles and aimed at the dismembered corpses that were rushing at them. Boom, boom, boom. Sparks flew as shells landed in different spots on the battlefield, exploding and emitting a thick darkness. The dismembered corpses collapsed, the strength within them vanishing. Otherwise, they were directly destroyed, returning to their eternal slumber. The mysterious black-robed man behind the resistance army raised his arms upon seeing this, as though he was hugging the crimson moon. At that moment, his body suddenly turned incorporeal. His body dyed a faint red as he transformed into a hazy ray of moonlight. The moonlight shattered instantly, turning into red scales before dissipating in place. Moonlight transformation. This was a Beyonder power that a Sequence 5 Scarlet Scholar of the Apothecary Pathway possessed. To a Sequence 4 Shaman King, it was almost instinctive. And at the spot where the Shaman King had been, a figure quickly outlined itself. It was a huge cloth doll. It had blonde hair and bright red eyes, and wore a long black Gothic dress with countless mysterious patterns engraved on it. Swirling around it was sinister vines. Its skin had a luster that no human should possess. Renette Tinnaker. She had used the Staff of the Stars to summon herself back when she was in perfect condition. Of course, the Staff of the Stars that was lent to Miss Messenger was the real one. Klein had brought it back to the real world from above the gray fog ahead of time. If that wasn't the case, it would be equivalent to Klein's historical projection summoning a Staff of the Stars projection. Then, the projection of the Staff of the Stars would summon Renette Tinnaker in her peak state. The whole burden would be placed on Force, causing her spirituality to be quickly drained. A solution to this problem was to temporarily lend the actual Staff of the Stars to Renette Tinnaker. The draining of spirituality would be borne by this ancient bane. At the same time, Renette Tinnaker was probably one of the existences that were the least afraid of the negative effects of the Staff. As a key representative of the Temperance faction, and as a puppet and a cloth doll, she could stop unwanted scenes from surfacing in her mind. And after changing into a concealed state, the Staff of the Stars could hardly affect her historical void projection. The peak state Renette Tinnaker had attempted to sneak closer to directly possess the Rose School of Thought's Shaman King and instantly end the battle. However, the other party had discovered the danger ahead of time. Using the moonlight's illumination, he was one step ahead of the Wraith's possession. Amidst the crimson glow that enveloped the ground, red scales rapidly reformed into the black-robed, hooded Rose School of Thought Shaman King. His eyes were closed, eyes tightly, not daring to look at the ancient bane opposite him. At the same time, on the other side of the battlefield, a figure rapidly appeared. It was none other than Gehrman Sparrow, who was wearing a black trench coat and a half-top hat. He had a transparent glove on his left hand as he raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. Scarlet flames rose up from various parts of the battlefield, as if they were announcing the beginning of a grand performance. Just as the Shaman King finished reforming, he reached out his left hand and tore apart the clothes on his chest. At that moment, Renette Tinnaker's bright red eyes reflected his figure. If things went as expected, the Rose School of Thought Shaman King would have transformed into a rabbit or a goat in the next second. He would lose most of his characteristics and Beyonder powers, but his body only emitted a faint glow without any change. His exposed chest revealed a long, thin brown puppet, which was embedded there. The puppet seemed to grow out of the Shaman King's body, its body connected to his internal organs. Its eyes and mouth were like crescents. The surface of its body was grown with dried flowers and withered grass, giving off an indescribable bizarreness in the moonlight. Suddenly, the puppet was dyed red, as though it was soaked in blood. It immediately turned into a pool of mud that surged into the organs of the Shaman King. Amidst the mud, an arm stretched out. Its surface was flowing with a black, sticky liquid that kept protruding out with strange objects. Some were skulls, some had barbed tongues, while others had three-dimensional eyes. Abomination, Sua? This Rose School of Thought's leader, an existence at Sequence 1, had crossed the vast distance and descended with the help of prior arrangements. That evil aura, instantly caused the surrounding members of the Rose School of Thought and supporting members to either die, mutate, or wildly attack their comrades. Apart from the Shaman King, no one was spared. West Balaam, in a port city, Shaman King Klarman, who wielded the highest authority here, stood at the top floor of a cathedral that once belonged to the Church of Evernight as he looked down at the sparsely lit city. In a house not far away, Emlyn White glanced at the doll-like Sharon and took out a bronze box with many ruby gems embedded in it. Inside the box was an eyeball-shaped glass sphere. It was a sealed artifact which Emlyn had requested from the Sanguine, known as the Vision of White, an artifact of the Sun Domain. It was very effective at dealing with the mutant pathway's demigods and shaman kings. It could even be considered able to restrain them in certain aspects. Of course, it wouldn't feel any sense of pity and kindness just because Emlyn and Sharon were Beyonders on its side. Upon seeing Sharon nod slightly to indicate that there were no problems, Emlyn's body phased away as the moonlight that shone into the room, and he disintegrated into a series of colorful red scales. At the apex of the nearby cathedral, Klarman was pacing back and forth with his puffy black and white hair. He sneered at the city's nighthawks and mandated punishers for moving the low-end citizens and all the sealed artifacts away ahead of time. As he muttered silently to himself,
"If the group consisted only of Beyonders, it wouldn't be impossible to escape, but with so many ordinary people, how can you effectively move without being noticed? There's no need for me to send people to track you. Simply locking down the surrounding docks and food supplies is enough to break you down without my interference."
This Shaman King, who had been active in the southern continent since the early 5th epoch and was even suspected to be dead, cast his gaze out the window and stared at the crimson moon high in the sky. Previously, the abnormal phenomenon of the crimson moon turning white made Klarman feel the anger of the primordial moon. He had always felt uneasy and disturbed. He had become a primordial moon believer over time while researching natural interactions, secret deeds, and other mysterious knowledge. Normally, it was relatively easy for a Shaman King to live 1,000 years, but later on, his physical condition waned, an irreversible form of aging and the decay of his spirit body. Therefore, 1,200 years was commonly the natural limit of Shaman Kings and Sanguine Earls. To continue living, one could only rely on various methods to survive. For example, sealing oneself and sleeping in a coffin deep within a castle. Klarman was nearly 1,400 years old and still brimming with energy. He didn't need to limit his movements because he had received the primordial moon's blessings. This was also the reason why he had disappeared for so many years. Later on, he received a revelation from the primordial moon and joined the Rose School of Thought. In this aspect, Klarman always had his suspicions. Sometimes he believed that the Mother Tree of Desire and the primordial moon were one entity. They were different sides of the same great existence. Yet there were other times when he felt that the Mother Tree of Desire and the primordial moon were not only different, but there was also a deep conflict between them. This resulted in the primordial moon believers not getting enough attention when they later joined the Rose School of Thought. Apart from receiving some bestowments in the form of items, they were placed in non-critical positions. Just as Klarman was focused on sensing the crimson moon in an attempt to gain a revelation, the crimson moonlight that fell onto the cathedral's bell tower had pure red scales of light appear as they gathered together. It then manifested into Emlyn White, who wore a tuxedo and a bow tie. Behind this sanguine, a thick black gas emanated, forming a pair of illusory bat wings. Emlyn had already consumed the corresponding potion to remove his scent and spirituality fluctuations, allowing him to approach his target in secret. Of course, he was up against a demigod, a sequence 4 demigod of the same pathway. Even if he was fully prepared, he didn't dare get too close, or else he would easily be discovered. Looking at the window where Shaman King Klarman was, he examined the projection on the glass for a second. Emlyn White opened the bronze box with the rubies embedded in it, and he used his black velvet-gloved left hand to pick up the Vision of White. His expression twisted as he experienced the pain that came from being exposed to the blazing sun. Suppressing the pain, Emlyn pushed the eyeball-shaped glass sphere to his right eye. All the buildings in front of him had suddenly disappeared from his vision, leaving only shadows of cold, crimson, or fallen evil. Among them there was a figure that was like a huge black whirlpool that was crazily devouring the light around it, causing his body to become distorted. This was Emlyn's target, the ancient shaman king, Klarman. A ray of light immediately lit up, condensing into a scorching, blinding light. It shot out from the vision of white and went straight for the figure behind the glass window. Chapter 1234. The Projection's Descent. The blinding white beam penetrated the glass window and landed on Shaman King Klarman. It then burst into an intense light, melting away all the undead, darkness, and evil. Klarman's figure burned with a white flame, as though he was a paper figurine that had been brought near red embers. But it really was a paper figurine, one that seemed to be condensed from the crimson moonlight, the Shaman King's substitute spell, Moon Paper Figurine. As the paper figurine turned to ash, the ancient Shaman King appeared at the top of the cathedral and cast his cold gaze at Emlyn White, who was standing near the bell tower. At that moment, within Klarman's blood-red eyes, it reflected the figure of Sharon, who was wearing a black regal dress and a tiny bonnet. Her body stiffened as if she had lost control of herself. Seeing this, Emlyn didn't hesitate. It was as if he had practiced it 1,000 times before. He aimed his vision of white at the Shaman King's left chest and prepared to activate the Sun Domain's unshadowed spear. As long as this attack struck Klarman's heart, this Shaman King Klarman wouldn't be able to use Moonlight Transformation to resolve it. It would also be difficult for him to recover using an artificial vampire's super recovery abilities. Of course, this would definitely cause more serious damage to Sharon, who had possessed Klarman. However, if they could quickly resolve their target, she was willing to pay the corresponding price. In the previous discussions, Emlyn, Sharon, and Marek had already discussed a few similar plans and had come to a consensus. This was also the reason why Sharon didn't restrict Shaman King Klarman by tightening his clothes. Compared to a wraith's possession, that was easier to resolve for the opponent who could use Moonlight Transformation. As for whether Klarman would be ashamed of running naked, the answer from the magic mirror was no. Taking all these under consideration, they eventually chose to let Emlyn White attack the target so as to deplete his moon paper figurine to create an opportunity for Sharon to possess him. The transparent glass sphere in Emlyn's hand glowed once again, extending out into a blazing spear that had turned extremely white. But at this moment Klarman, who was standing at the top of the cathedral, suddenly underwent a transformation. A crack quickly split open in the middle of his forehead, as if there was a blood moon embedded in it. Moonlight surged out like a tidal wave, causing the illusory, blonde, blue-eyed Sharon to float out of his body uncontrollably. Klarman's stiff and slow movements barely restored to normal, and, under the radiance of the full moon, he turned into a pool of blood, splitting into countless fragments of light. His figure rapidly took form on another steeple of the cathedral. Clinging closely behind him was Sharon. As for the unshadowed spear that Emlyn had created, it passed through the spot where Klarman was originally standing and flew into the distance, expanding into a miniature sun. The entire port city was illuminated. At the same time, Klarman's right shoulder began to squirm before something tore through his black robe and burrowed out. This was an exquisite male doll. It was only the size of a palm and wore a dark red, gold-patterned tuxedo. Its eyes had been dug out, leaving behind 2 black holes. The puppet sat on Klarman's shoulder and raised its hands, tapping all its fingers as though it was playing an invisible instrument. Sharon's figure was immediately ejected from Klarman's back, as though she suffered a serious repulsion. Emlyn felt his clothes tighten as they bound him tightly. His bow tie also came alive in a bid to strangle him to death. That doll was a Grade 1 sealed artifact given to Klarman by the Rose School of Thought. It was called the General of the Pupilless Eye. It was an item formed by a Sequence 4 demigod of the mutant pathway who had suffered a sudden death due to an accident. It had a living characteristic and could possess objects with spirits and awaken objects that didn't according to its wielder's will. However, the wielder needed to feed it with their flesh and blood, otherwise it would gradually grow its eyes. Once this sealed artifact was in a good condition, it would transform into an evil spirit that chased after its original owner while abhorring all humans. When Emlyn heard the sound of his bones crying in pain from the burden, the vision of white that was burning his soul emitted a bright glow, turning the surrounding area into a land without shadows or evil. The effects of the pupilless eye had on his clothes were severed. However, at that moment, Clarman had already indiscernibly muttered a particular word with a cruel smile. He reached out his hands and pulled out an illusory door with many mysterious symbols engraved on it out of thin air. This was the door of summoning. The Moon Pathways Sequence 3 was Summoning Master. Under the illumination of the full blood moon on his forehead, Clarman, who was only at the Shaman King level, was able to complete a summoning. However, because of this, there was a certain change in his overall aura. He had lost a lot of his rationality, and his madness had deepened. Amidst the illusory creaking, the door of summoning opened up a crack. In the gaps, 2 human palms reached out. Their skin had no luster to it, and they lacked texture. They were like a most inferior cloth doll. Outside Faltech City, the Rose School of Thought believers and followers who had originally planned on attacking the Loan Army's defense line after the Corpse Horde's attack had begun to kill each other, their rationality completely gone. Some of them, who were originally ordinary people, bent their backs and grew grayish-black wolf fur. The corners of their mouths tore open as sticky saliva constantly dripped. Some of their skin was dyed black and had become as hard as steel. Some lost their hearts and fell to the ground, only to get back on their feet as though nothing had happened. Some of their bodies turned transparent, as if they had become shadows. The descent of Abomination Sua's aura had tainted all the living creatures in the vicinity, causing them to either break down and suffer a tragic death, or turn into werewolves or zombies. As a high-ranking Sequence 1, he could directly bestow the power unto his believers, but there was a time limit. However, this method might not be the hope of the resistance. On the other side of the battlefield, over 2,000 meters away, behind the Loan shelter, although the soldiers didn't see or hear anything, transparent blisters began growing on the surface of their skin, and their minds were filled with thoughts of venting all kinds of emotions and desires. It wouldn't take long for them to go mad one by one and turn into irrational beasts. Across this base, even to the interior of Faltech City, it would be a challenge to find humans who could still maintain their clarity of mind. Suddenly, they heard a chant. It was a chant formed from sacred and ethereal voices. This chant came from the Evernight Cathedral in the city. It was as though there were many choirs praising the goddess. The soldiers, citizens, and officers fell asleep one after another, behind the shelter, inside the trenches, and on the streets. They dreamed of a tranquil darkness, moonflowers, and night vanilla. Their bodies and minds became extremely peaceful, and they were no longer affected by evil. In the Evernight Cathedral in Faltech City, the high-ranking deacon of the Nighthawks, the goddess's eye, Ilya, tried her best to maintain the dream that enveloped the entire city. She was unable to interfere with the demigod battle outside. At the same time, Klein and Raynette Tinneker felt the change in the surrounding spirituality. It seemed to transform into layers of barriers that attempted to restrain them and restrict their actions. And in the bloody mud on the Shaman King's chest, a lump of squirming flesh covered in black, sticky liquid drilled out right on the heels of Sua's arm, forming the body of this abomination. He was like a huge tree that had been splashed with oil. The extended branches were arms, which had various strange objects protruding out. Sahajeo sa tahaja ta ha 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 ha. On the surface of the trunk that was covered in thick black liquid, bloodshot eyes kept rolling. It cleared the minds of the onlookers, turning them into rabbits, goats, and pigs. The dozens of arms rapidly extended outwards. Some of them sealed off the sky, while others burrowed into the ground. The rest either surrounded them from all sides or headed straight for Klein and Raynette Tinneker. At the same time, Abomination Su'a let out a roar that pierced straight into one's spirit body. It caused the two targets to tremble at the same time, causing a certain degree of stiffness to rear its head. It made the crimson moonlight in mid-air become even richer, allowing a scene to appear on the red screen. The core to this scene was a mummy wrapped in a yellowing bandage. It had been pierced by countless brown tree branches and was suspended in mid-air. Its stomach bulged, and at times different parts bulged and shriveled, as if it was giving birth to new life. No! The mummy's mouth was agape as it kept screaming. Although Klein couldn't hear any actual sounds, he felt pain resonating with his body and soul, slowly burdening him with the mummy's predicament. The Chained God. The roar of Abomination Su'a was formed from ancient Hermes words that exceeded the imagination of humans. It was essentially praying to the chained god, and he had successfully received a response. The mother tree of desire was unable to infuse too much power into reality. If one wanted to pray to her and obtain feedback at the angel level, they required a large-scale ritual. Of course, the influence the mother tree of desire directly exerted and her attention via the chained god had qualitative differences. The chained god was originally not a true god, but he had contained the mutant pathway's uniqueness and two-sequence one, Beyonder characteristics, making him a king of angels. After giving birth to Abomination Su'a, he even lost a sequence one Beyonder characteristic. When he was completely overwhelmed by the mother tree of desire, he similarly suffered a life of isolation. Therefore, regardless of the essence of the mother tree of desire, the effect she had on reality was limited due to the indirect methods used. But no matter what, the trap targeted at Raynet Tinnaker was luxurious enough. As the projection of the chained god appeared, the entire land was dyed with a dark red color. Klein felt that his connection with the spirit world had been severed, and he could no longer use teleportation. His figure instantly leaped into a sea of flames. Taking advantage of the opportunity when Raynet Tinnaker was fighting against Su'a, he reached his hand into the void and grabbed at different spots. Finally, Klein pulled out a silver-black jewelry box embedded with various gems. Then, without any hesitation, he opened the second level. Box of the Great Old Ones. This Grade 0 sealed artifact's second level could transfer all living beings within its range to a particular scene recorded by it. Chapter 1235. Most Valued Support. The silver-black, three-tiered accessory box with many embedded gems quickly opened, revealing the interior of the second level. It was dark. Even the surrounding barriers seemed to blend in with it. It gave one the feeling that it was a pocket of infinite space. In an instant, the darkness lit up with countless resplendent speckles, as if they had transformed into a miniature cosmos, a miniature universe. These bright points of light rapidly spun as the surrounding scene changed several times in a second. What Klein expected was to move Abomination Su'a, the Rose School of Thought shaman, and many of their followers to the ruins of the Battle of the Gods. By making them leave the southern continent, they wouldn't be able to immediately sense that Klarman had been attacked. This way, they wouldn't be able to provide any timely and effective assistance. However, the second level of the Box of the Great Old Ones had an element of randomness to it. The act of sending things to the designated scene succeeded a handful of times. Most of the time, the selected destination would suffer an unavoidable change. This was something that couldn't be influenced with luck, and at the very least, no one below sequence 0 could do so. Therefore, when he opened the second level of the Box of the Great Old Ones, Klein didn't know what would happen. It was the same as not using any Beyonder powers to cheat at gambling. He had to rely solely on observation to push out all his chips. This left his heart filled with anxiety. Of course, he wasn't too worried. No matter where the Box of the Great Old Ones brought him and Miss Messenger, it was impossible to harm him in any way. After all, Raynet Tinnaker was fake, the Box of the Great Old Ones was fake, and even he himself was fake. With this in consideration, even if he was thrown underground by the Box of the Great Old Ones and faced a terrifying corruption, Klein could instantly dispel the historical void projection, enter Sephira Castle to do a complete disinfection, and sever all connections. Building on this foundation, he had the ability to help Miss Messenger's main body resist the corruption. Since it wasn't directly experienced through the layer of a historical projection, the outcome was relatively better. The only thing he needed to worry about was that the random scene selected by the box of the Great Old Ones was where Miss Sharon and Emlyn were attacking Shaman King Klarman. That way, it would be equivalent to leading the main enemy force to head straight for his headquarters. This meant that they could only consider giving up on the operation, and he and Renette Tinneker would undertake the responsibility of helping all participants escape from the battlefield and escape the southern continent. The probability of this happening was very low, but he had to be wary. At that moment, due to the influence of Abomination Sua's aura, Klein's spirituality had frozen quite a bit. It seemed to bind his body and soul, but it still flowed into the box of the Great Old Ones, maintaining its open state. In the blink of an eye, the scene in the second level of the box of the Great Old Ones changed, revealing a tiny, vast sea. Klein, Renette Tinneker, Abomination Sua, the hooded Shaman King, and many Rose School of Thought believers and subordinates saw endless yellow sand and the extreme cold of the night. Other than the projection of the chained god, all the living beings on the battlefield were instantly transported to a desert. As for the projection, due to the departure of Abomination Sua, the connection was severed, preventing his powers from seeping into reality. Without the luxury of time to examine where he was currently, Klein dispelled the box of the Great Old Ones and snapped his fingers, summoning a scarlet flame as he constantly jumped within them. He had done so to avoid the attention of Abomination Sua, as well as grab the opportunity to complete the summoning of the historical void projection. At that moment, he heard an extremely evil roar. His mind suddenly went blank, and he temporarily lost all his thoughts. The scarlet flames he was immersed in came alive as well and, like a cage, bound him to the ground. With just a roar and the influence of some auras, Abomination Sua had already restrained him to a certain extent. If it wasn't for the fact that Renette Tinneker, who was in her peak condition, was his teammate, Klein's projection would have been helplessly executed. Perhaps his actual body would suffer certain effects. At this moment, the huge doll, the size of a castle, took a step forward and opened its tightly shut mouth. There was no sound, but the distorted wood that was covered in pitch-black liquid seemed to encounter a flood dike. It repelled backward and raised the arms with strange, protruding objects. This was a curse that Renette Tinneker had been silently accumulating for a very, very long time. The root of the curse was the anger, hatred, and her grudge that had emerged after she suffered an attack. However, Abomination Sua didn't show any obvious changes. He only staggered a little and froze for a second before returning to normal. High-level existences were always able to restrain low-level beyonders of the same pathway. They could even exert a certain influence over space. And using this opportunity to escape the restraints of the flames, Klein used Creeping Hunger to flash to another side, avoiding the Blood Moon arrow created by the Rose School of Thought's Shaman King. He didn't dare to look directly at Abomination Sua. He seized the opportunity and reached out with his right hand to pull out from the void ahead. This time, he didn't drag anything out. Klein continued blinking about and repeated his actions. Then, he successfully dragged out a figure. It was none other than the leader of the Church of Evernights Ascetics, the Angel of the Concealment Domain, Ariana, who wore a simple linen robe and a tree bark belt.
My report from before worked, after all.
A thought flashed through his mind as he activated Creeping Hunger once again and teleported elsewhere. The eyes of Ariana's projection darted slightly as her eyes instantly turned dark and deep. Following that, she joined in the battle between Renette Tinneker and Abomination Sua. With her help, Renette Tinneker, who was in a rather difficult situation and trying hard to create opportunities for him, finally managed to catch her breath. She didn't get possessed by Abomination Sua, nor did she become a real doll. The Rose School of Thought's Shaman King showcased his well-rounded aspect towards the darkness and moon domains. He attempted to use spells like Abyss Shackles to restrict Klein's movement, but the short-distance blinking was simply too effective. Without the projection of the chained god and his influence of the surrounding area, and the interference of abomination, Klein was like a fish in water. He was free and relaxed. He only needed to consider how to deal with his enemy's spells every 2 teleports. However, the Shaman King could hardly stop him in an effective manner due to the unpredictability of where he would appear next. During this process, Klein grabbed at the void a few more times until he dragged out a figure. Perpitten. This figure had bronze skin, black hair, and brown eyes. His facial features were soft and his gaze was cold. He wore a deep black robe embroidered with golden thread. He wore a golden crown and was none other than the former death consul, Isaac Eggers. The Shaman King's eyelids twitched as he watched.
Another angel.
At this moment, Abomination Sua suddenly inserted multiple black arms into the desert. The desert nearby boiled and was blanketed with a thick black liquid. This extended into the distance and invaded the void, disrupting the overlapping of reality and the spirit world. Taking advantage of the fact that his teleportation wasn't completely affected, Klein blinked behind Mr. Isaac. With him shielding him, he quickly grabbed at the air a few times. His arm suddenly sank and he pulled out a silvery white snake's tail. Another angel! The reason why he dared to directly summon the 3 angels was because this historical void projection of his was summoned by Renette Tynakur, using the Staff of the Stars. The spirituality consumed was born by this ancient bane, not Fours. Otherwise, Fours would have already fainted the moment the servant of concealment, Ariana, descended. There was no way she could endure spirituality expenditure such as this. Fours' purpose was to first summon Gehrman Sparrow's historical projection, so that he had plenty of time to set up the ritual and bring the Staff of the Stars to the real world. Then, the maintenance of the historical projection would be dispelled, allowing him to return to the fog and have Renette Tynakur summoned another him. In less than 10 seconds, as Abomination Sua had focused his attention on Renette Tynakur and subconsciously belittled Klein, leading him to not only losing the help of the chained god's projection, but also being thrown from the state of being the one who had laid an ambush to the one being besieged by 4 powerful angels. Without any hesitation, this sequence one angel opened his mouth and chanted in ancient Hermes words. He had once again prayed to the chained god. When the door of summoning opened in front of Shaman King Klarman, just the extension of 2 trembling hands was enough for a thought to abruptly flash across Emlyn White's mind.
The other angel of the Rose School of Thought, the King of Curses, Baranka.
This was information provided by Sharoon and Merrick. Upon seeing this, Emlyn's mind tensed up. Without any hesitation, he waved his arm and threw the vision of white at the door of summoning. This was partly because he was experiencing a battle at the demigod level for the first time, so he couldn't help but overreact. On the other hand, he wasn't worried about losing the vision of white. After all, it belonged to the Sanguine. At worst, he would repay it in the future over time. At the same time, even without the sealed artifact, he still had other mystical items to use, such as Leymano's travels. With the notebook, Emlyn could summon the unshadowed crucifix to replace the vision of white. After the eyeball-shaped glass sphere flew out, it continuously absorbed the light along the way, bringing with it extreme darkness. When it got close to the door of summoning, the vision of white suddenly exploded into an extremely brilliant glow. Like a blazing sun at noon, it enveloped both the hands and the door, melting away all evil, degenerate darkness, filth, and undead auras. The full blood moon on Klarman's forehead was clearly affected. All the light beams were compressed to his side, preventing him from affecting his surroundings. Seizing this opportunity, Sharon's figure that appeared in midair distorted, turning into a human-sized puppet. Nasmaz. This puppet was identical to Shaman King Klarman. It had messy, black and white hair, and a pair of bright red eyes. As for Emlyn, he raised his left arm and revealed a translucent ring that was worn outside his gloved index finger. The ring seemed to be made of light red amber, and there was a blood-colored gem embedded on it.
Lilith's ring.
This was a ring personally made by the Sanguine ancestor, the ancient goddess Lilith. It could project a door that led deep into the spirit world for a certain amount of time, summoning an unknown creature. Emlyn wasn't sure what he would obtain. He only knew that under normal circumstances the summoned object was usually slightly stronger than him. But the possibility of directly pulling out a demigod wasn't impossible. At the tip of the ring, the blood-colored gem emitted a faint glow as an illusory door covered in mysterious patterns appeared in front of Emlyn. The door creaked open, the gap in the door widening. Shaman King Klarman had just recovered his senses from the sun's illumination when he saw a moon rise up behind the door of summoning. It was a bright moon, one that was slightly silver in color.